Step
"Which
aside,
bride?"
woman.
The
This
Alpha
does not
King was
concern
asked.
you.
"The tall one," he
It
replied,
concerns
staggering
justice.
everyone.
I will not
The
move.
wind carried the scent of pine and ice, but beneath it was a deeper, darker tension, the kind that stirred the heart without a sound. It was a kingdom of power, of fear, and above all, of the Alpha King. King Alaric was a man whose shadow alone could command respect. His presence in a room could silence 100 voices. Legends whispered of his victories and his iron will, but those who truly knew him, very few, spoke also of a sorrow buried beneath the surface, a wound left by betrayal, a love lost to treachery years ago. That sorrow made him cold, sharp, and yet magnetic, like a wolf guarding the heart of a winter forest. On this day, the halls of the Frostspire Castle were alive with movement. Nobles, ladies, and princes arrived from distant lands, each presenting a potential bride for the king. Gold, jewels, and beauty walked in measured steps, each woman trying to catch the king's gaze. Some bowed so low their crowns almost touched the floor. Others smiled with practiced charm, hoping to win a single glance. But Alaric's eyes were as distant as the northern stars. None had yet stirred his interest. Among the gathered women, one stood taller than most. She was not adorned in silk or diamonds, nor did she wear a crown or shimmer with artificial charm. Yet she commanded attention. Her hair fell like midnight waves, her eyes held the quiet strength of forests and storms, and her posture, unbending, unyielding, spoke of a spirit no one could easily tame. The courtiers whispered. "Who is she?" some asked. "She looks like she belongs to the mountains, not this court." She was known only as the Tall One, and she had come not for glory but necessity. Her past was veiled in shadows. She carried secrets and a curse she had learned to hide. It was a curse that made her presence dangerous yet compelling, a power that would call to those who could sense it. She did not bow or flutter her eyes. She simply stood, waiting, watching, measuring the court as if the world itself belonged to her judgment. The king finally turned to her. It happened slowly, almost reluctantly, as if a force within him, one long silent, was finally awakening. The court held its breath. His gaze lingered on her, the tension in the air thickening like storm clouds. And then came the words that would change everything. "Which bride?" a noble asked, voice trembling between reverence and curiosity. "The tall one," King Alaric replied, and the castle seemed to shiver. Gasps echoed. Courtiers whispered, disbelief and outrage blending together. The women who had trained for years to capture his favor looked stunned. But the tall one remained calm, though inside her chest, her heart beat faster than any drum in the hall. She did not yet understand why the king had chosen her. Perhaps it was her height, perhaps the air of defiance she carried. But there was something in his eyes, something dangerous and magnetic, that drew her even as it threatened her. That evening, the tall one was led to the king's private chambers, a part of the castle rarely entered by outsiders. The halls were lined with frozen tapestries, their threads glittering like frost. The air was quiet except for the faint echo of their footsteps and the whisper of wind through the stone walls. Here, she would face the man who was both feared and revered, the man who had chosen her above all others. "Do you know why you are here?" Alaric asked as they stood facing each other in the dim candlelight. His voice was low, measured, carrying both command and curiosity. The tall one lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without fear. "I am here because you chose me," she said simply. "Not for who I am, but for what you see in me." A shadow passed over Alaric's face, a flicker of something unspoken. Few had ever dared speak to him with such frankness. Few had ever looked at him and seen him not as a king, but as a man. "You are different," he said finally, his tone almost a whisper. "I feel it. Something in you calls to me, stronger than any crown, stronger than any court intrigue. But you must know, what I sense may also destroy you." The tall one's heart skipped. She had known her curse made her dangerous, but to hear the king speak of it as both a warning and a recognition filled her with a strange mix of fear and hope. She had not expected him to notice, not to care, not to understand. Yet here he was, seeing her in a way few ever would. That night she could not sleep. Alone in the guest chamber prepared for her, she traced the mark hidden on her wrist, a mark that pulsed softly whenever the king was near. She had kept it secret, feared that any human recognition might trigger a catastrophe. Yet Alaric had looked at her, and for the first time she wondered if perhaps he could withstand her power, or if, in time, they would destroy each other. Meanwhile, the court outside murmured in confusion and fear. "Why the tall one?" they whispered. "She is neither noble nor wealthy. She is strange, untested, unknown." Their doubt did not touch the king. Alaric had made his choice, and he never wavered once a decision was made. Yet even he did not fully understand why she stirred something within him that no other had. Days passed, and the tall one was introduced to the customs of the court. She observed the games of power with quiet intensity. She noticed how the king interacted with his advisors, how he commanded loyalty without cruelty, and how he carried his grief with a shadowed grace. She realized that this man, feared by many, bore the weight of his past like a winter cloak, shielding a heart that was capable of both cruelty and immense tenderness. Despite the court's attempts to unsettle her, the tall one remained poised. She met Alaric's eyes with a mixture of challenge and caution. Their exchanges were often brief, charged with tension, like two predators circling each other in a frozen clearing. Neither fully revealed their intentions, yet both sensed a pull that was undeniable, a magnetic force that would not be denied. One afternoon, walking alone in the castle gardens, the tall one felt the wind bite harder, snow swirling in chaotic patterns around her. She sensed a presence and turned to see Alaric approaching, his cloak flowing like shadowed silk. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze soft yet intense. "You carry a storm within you," he said, almost as if speaking to the wind itself. "And yet you walk among us as though it is nothing." "I have learned to live with it," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart thumped with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "It has been my companion longer than I have known." Alaric stepped closer. The air between them seemed to tighten, charged with a force that neither fully understood. "And yet," he murmured, "it calls to me. I do not know if it is for danger or for something more." Her lips parted, but she said nothing. In that moment, the snow and wind faded into the background. There was only the pull between them, an unspoken connection that neither could ignore. Night fell, and the castle grew quiet. Candles flickered in the hallways, shadows stretched long across stone floors, and the wind whispered through the battlements. The tall one returned to her chamber, yet sleep remained elusive. She thought of the king, of his unexpected choice, and of the strange thrill of being seen, not as a potential pawn, but as a force that mattered, a presence that could not be ignored. And then, a soft knock at her chamber door. She opened it to find a small, intricately carved box, left without explanation. Inside was a single black feather and a note in the king's hand. "Fear is natural, but some storms must be faced together." Her breath caught. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried weight beyond any jewel or crown. For the first time, she wondered if this storm, this connection, could be different from all the dangers she had known. Perhaps it was not only a threat, but also a promise. As she held the feather, she felt the pulse of her hidden mark quicken, stronger than ever before. The king's presence, even from a distance, was pulling at the very core of her being. The realization filled her with a mixture of dread and longing. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the kingdom in a blanket of silver. Inside, in the quiet and shadows, two forces, each shaped by pain, power, and secrets, were beginning a dangerous, undeniable dance. A story had begun that would shake the very foundations of Frostspire, a tale whispered in fear and awe. The Alpha King had chosen the Tall One. And somewhere deep within, both of them knew, nothing would ever be the same again. The castle of Frostspire had grown quieter, but tension lingered in every hall and corridor. King Alaric, who had chosen the Tall One above all others, walked through the torchlit corridors with a purposeful stride, his cloak trailing behind him like the shadow of a storm. Each step echoed in the stone halls, a reminder that power and danger lived here together. The Tall One followed, keeping a careful distance. Though she had grown accustomed to the castle's cold corridors, the air felt heavier now, charged with unspoken words and invisible currents. Her pulse quickened each time Alaric's shadow fell near her, each time she caught his gaze lingering longer than the decorum allowed. "You are different from the others," Alaric said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "They seek favor, beauty, wealth. You seek nothing. And yet I feel you have already claimed something of me." The Tall One's lips curved faintly. "Perhaps," she said softly, "because you have chosen me without knowing what you claim." He stopped suddenly, turning to face her. His eyes, sharp and cold like the northern wind, searched her face. "I know enough to know it matters. What I see in you, it is not simple. I cannot explain it, yet I cannot ignore it. And that," he added, "is dangerous for both of us." She met his gaze evenly, her voice calm though her heart raced. "Danger is nothing new to me, Your Majesty. You should know that by now." Alaric's lips twitched, as if he were almost amused, though the darkness of his past lingered in his eyes. Few had ever spoken to him this way. Even fewer had held his attention with words alone. The Tall One had done so with a glance and a calm defiance that unsettled him in ways he could not fully understand. The days passed, and the Tall One began her introduction to the rules of Frostspire's court. Each day brought new lessons, but none were as compelling as the lessons of silence and observation. She watched the king as he dealt with advisors and nobles. She saw the way he commanded loyalty not through fear alone, but through respect and the subtle assertion of his presence. And though he was feared, she also glimpsed the moments of vulnerability he tried to hide, flickers of sorrow in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when reminded of past losses, the way he sometimes stared at nothing, lost in memory. One evening she found herself standing on the castle balcony, the wind whipping around her like icy fingers. The snow fell in chaotic patterns, covering the frozen gardens below. She did not expect him to join her, yet there he was, stepping quietly behind her. "You feel the pull, don't you?" he asked, his voice softer than usual, almost a confession. "Not just of this castle, not just of your fate here, but of something deeper, something neither of us can yet name." She turned to him, meeting his gaze with quiet resolve. "I feel it," she admitted, "but it frightens me. I do not know if it is a gift or a trap." Alaric stepped closer, the wind swirling around them, tugging at their cloaks and hair. "Perhaps it is both," he said, "but the only way to understand is to face it, together." For the first time, the Tall One hesitated. She had always faced her own challenges alone. She had survived curses and secrets, dangers that could not be seen or named. But the idea of facing something unknown with another, especially someone as powerful and unpredictable as the king, made her chest tighten with unfamiliar longing. "You speak of trust," she said quietly, "but can it survive here? In a place of crowns and power where every word can be weaponized and every glance carries strategy." Alaric's eyes darkened. "Trust is rare in Frostspire, but so is honesty, and so is courage. If you cannot trust me, we will both fail." The Tall One studied him, noting the weight of his words. They were not idle promises, not the rehearsed lines of a courtier. They were a challenge, a test. And yet there was something in them that stirred a cautious hope inside her, a hope she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Over the next days, their interactions became a dance of shadows, subtle and precise. Alaric tested her wit and composure, asking questions meant to unsettle, observing her reactions. She responded with quiet strength, never faltering, never giving more than necessary. Yet in the smallest moments, the way she touched a candlestick absent-mindedly, the way her eyes followed the fluttering snow outside the window. He noticed a humanity that softened the edges of his calculated world. One afternoon, as a storm gathered over the cliffs, the Tall One was summoned to the king's private chamber. The room was dim, lit by a single fire whose flames danced like living things along the stone walls. He gestured for her to sit, though she remained standing, her posture unyielding. "I want to know you," he said simply, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his face. "Not the woman who stands before a court, but the one who carries a storm inside." She hesitated, then allowed herself to sit. "And if I tell you everything," she asked, her voice low, "will it change your mind? Or will it give you reason to fear?" Alaric's gaze softened, and for a moment the coldness of the Alpha King melted into something raw and human. "I fear nothing that is honest, but I will admit, understanding you may demand more than I am prepared to give." The Tall One leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of those words. She had hidden her curse from the world, fearing what it could do if revealed. And yet here was a man, the king, who did not flinch, who seemed almost curious, almost willing. "Years ago," she began, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly, "I was taken in by those who claimed to care for me. They trained me, taught me, and yet betrayed me in ways I am still learning to forgive. That betrayal left a mark, one that no one has yet understood until now." Alaric listened without interruption, his eyes fixed on her. When she finished, silence filled the room, heavy but not uncomfortable. "You are brave," he said finally, "not because you face your curse, but because you continue to walk in a world that has already sought to break you. Few have that courage, and fewer still wear it as naturally as you do." The Tall One felt a strange warmth at his words, a rare acknowledgment of her struggles and strength. Yet even as she felt it, a shiver of caution ran through her. Trusting him too soon could be dangerous. Too late, she realized, could be worse. As evening deepened into night, the castle grew silent. Candles flickered, shadows stretched across the walls, and outside the storm raged, snow whipping violently against the windows. The Tall One returned to her chamber, but she could not sleep. Thoughts of the king, of the strange pull between them, and of the pulse of her hidden curse kept her mind alert. That night, a whisper reached her, carried on the wind that sneaked through cracks in the walls. It was faint, almost lost in the storm, but unmistakable. "She is not yours, Alpha." The Tall One shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The warning was clear. Her curse, her past, and unseen dangers all threatened what had begun to stir between her and the king. Yet, despite the fear, she could not deny the thrill of the connection, the sense that her path and Alaric's were entwined, whether by choice or by fate. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving the castle bathed in pale winter sunlight. Alaric appeared at her chamber door, his expression unreadable. He extended his hand. "Walk with me," he said simply. She took it, allowing him to lead her to the castle gardens. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and for a moment the world seemed stripped of pretense. Here there were no crowns, no whispers, no courtly expectations, only the two of them side by side. "You carry a storm," he said again, his voice quieter this time. "But perhaps it is a storm that can be shared, not feared." She looked at him, the pale sunlight catching her eyes. "And if it consumes us?" she asked softly. "Then we face it," he replied, "as allies, not adversaries. We may fall, but we will fall together." The Tall One felt the pull of his words, the truth in them, and something within her shifted. Trust, fragile and tentative, began to take root. And yet, deep in her heart, she knew the danger was far from over. As they returned to the castle, a shadow moved among the towers, unseen by any but the cold northern wind. A figure watched the two closely, eyes glinting with knowledge and intent. The danger that whispered on the wind the night before had not vanished. It had only waited, gathering strength, preparing to strike when the moment was right. Inside, the Tall One and Alaric shared a brief, fleeting smile, an acknowledgement of the unspoken bond forming between them. Neither yet realized the full scope of the trials to come, the forces that would seek to test their courage, loyalty, and hearts. But in that moment they were connected, two souls dancing on the edge of shadows, beginning a story neither could predict, yet both could not resist. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, the whisper returned, louder, more insistent. "She is not yours to claim." The tall one's pulse quickened, and Alaric's jaw tightened. The danger was real. The court, the curse, and the unseen enemies would soon make themselves known. But for now, for this brief moment, they could walk together, side by side, bound by something deeper than fear or ambition, a force neither fully understood, but both could not ignore. The dance of shadows had begun, and neither would escape it unscathed. The northern winds had grown colder, sharper, as though the world itself braced against an unseen danger. Frostspire Castle loomed over the jagged cliffs like a sentinel, its towers piercing the gray sky. Inside, King Alaric and the Tall One prepared to face a threat neither could ignore, the curse that shadowed her life, and the unseen figure who had whispered warnings through the wind. The Tall One stood in her chamber, staring at the mark on her wrist. It pulsed steadily, almost alive, as if sensing the danger that approached. She had learned to hide it, to keep it beneath layers of clothing and caution, yet now the pulse seemed stronger than ever. Alaric had seen it. He had acknowledged it. And now the question lingered. Could they control it, or would it consume them both? Alaric entered quietly, his cloak brushing the floor. "The storm is coming," he said, his voice measured, though a rare tension lingered beneath it. "We cannot wait. The curse that binds you, it will not remain hidden forever, and the one who seeks to use it, he is close." The Tall One turned to him, eyes steady despite the fear curling in her chest. "Then we face it," she said, "together." Their journey began at dawn. They rode through forests heavy with frost, the trees skeletal and silent. Snow crunched beneath the hooves of their horses, and the air carried the scent of pine, ice, and danger. The king and the Tall One were silent at first, each wrapped in thought. But every so often their eyes met. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a bond growing stronger as each step brought them closer to the unknown. They entered the Wraithwood, a cursed forest whispered about in legends. The trees seemed alive, their branches twisting like dark fingers. Mist clung to the ground, curling around their boots and horses' hooves. Shadows moved between the trunks, though they were never fully seen. The forest had a voice, a murmur that spoke directly to the heart, testing courage, resolve, and trust. "This place," Alaric said quietly, "tests more than skill, it tests the spirit." The Tall One nodded, gripping the reins tightly. "Then we must trust each other," she said, "or we will not survive it." They pressed deeper into the forest. At first the dangers were subtle, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, shadows that moved with intent. Then the forest grew bolder. Vines rose like serpents from the frozen earth, attempting to ensnare them. Spirits of the lost and restless appeared, their faces twisted with sorrow and rage, yet fading when met with courage and calm. Alaric drew his sword, the steel catching the dim light of the forest. "Stay close," he warned. "Do not let the forest take your fear. It feeds on weakness." The Tall One did not need warning. Her curse flared in response to the threat. Light shimmered faintly along her skin, her mark glowing in rhythm with the pulse of the forest. She lifted her hand and the shadows recoiled, hissing as though burned by an invisible flame. Alaric's eyes widened. He had known she carried power, but seeing it wielded like this, controlled and purposeful, stirred both admiration and concern. "You are stronger than you know," he said, a note of awe in his voice. She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And you," she replied, "are braver than you admit." Together they moved through the forest, their bond deepening with each step. Each trial forced them to rely on one another, Alaric's strength and strategy, the Tall One's magic and intuition. Every time she used her power to shield him, every time he protected her from harm, The invisible threads that tied them together grew stronger, weaving a connection neither could ignore. Hours passed, though it felt like days. At last they reached the heart of the forest, a clearing where the air seemed still, almost sacred. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and worn, pulsing with a dark energy that resonated with the Tall One's curse. The shadowy figure who had whispered warnings appeared at the edge of the clearing. Cloaked in black, their eyes gleamed with malice. "You have come far," the figure said, voice smooth and cold. "But you cannot claim her. The curse is mine to command, and it will serve my purpose, not yours." Alaric stepped forward, placing himself between the figure and the Tall One. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice like steel. "Not while I draw breath." The figure laughed softly, a sound that made the trees shiver. "You know nothing of what you face, Alpha King. She is power, she is danger, and you are weak in comparison." The Tall One stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly as the pulse of her curse rose. "You speak as though you own me," she said, "but I am not yours, I am my own, and if you wish to claim me, you will have to pass through me first." The figure's eyes narrowed. With a sudden motion, shadows erupted from the forest floor, rushing toward them like living waves. Alaric swung his sword, cutting through darkness, while the Tall One extended her hands, her power flaring outward. Light and shadow collided, hissing and crackling in a deadly dance. The clearing shook, trees bending as the battle raged. Alaric fought with precision, protecting the Tall One while she unleashed the full measure of her power. Together, they were unstoppable, a combination of human skill and supernatural force. Yet the figure was clever, retreating and attacking in ways that tested their endurance and resolve. Breath came fast, hearts raced, but neither faltered. In the midst of the chaos, Alaric caught a glimpse of something unexpected, fear in the Tall One's eyes. Not for herself, but for him. She knew the cost of her power, the danger it posed even to those she cared for. "I will not let you fall," he shouted, cutting through a shadow that lunged at her. "Do you hear me? Not ever." Her eyes met his, and in that moment the world seemed to pause. She realized that despite the danger, despite the fear, she trusted him. She could rely on him. And more than that, she had begun to care for him, not just as a protector, but as someone whose presence stirred a warmth in her heart she had never known. With a final surge of effort, she focused all her energy, her curse pulsing in harmony with her will. Light erupted from her mark, driving the shadows back, forcing the figure to retreat. The forest fell silent, the oppressive energy lifting, leaving only the soft whisper of wind through the trees. Alaric lowered his sword, breathing heavily, and turned to her. "You did it," he said, awe in his voice. "You controlled it and you saved us both." The Tall One's knees trembled and she sank to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. "It is not over," she said softly. "The danger is still out there, but at least for now we have survived." Alaric knelt beside her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "And we will survive everything else together," he said. The bond between them had shifted, strengthened by shared trials and trust earned in the heat of battle. The courtly dance of shadows had become a real partnership, forged in danger and tempered by courage. And yet, even as they shared this moment of quiet triumph, the memory of the shadowy figure lingered. There was more to come, more challenges, more darkness that would test them both. They began their journey back to the castle, moving through the now calm forest. The Tall One rode with quiet dignity, Alaric beside her, their shoulders brushing occasionally, a silent reassurance of shared purpose. Every so often she glanced at him, noting the tension still hidden beneath his composed exterior, the way his jaw tightened with thoughts he did not speak aloud. "Tell me," she said finally, breaking the silence, "why do you trust me so easily?" "You have been betrayed, deceived. Why me?" Alaric's gaze softened. "Because you are not afraid to face who you are, and because I see what others do not. I see strength, courage, and honesty. That is worth trusting even if it scares me." The tall one felt a warmth in her chest she had not expected. It was not only admiration, but something deeper: connection, understanding, and perhaps the first stirrings of a bond that would survive even the darkest trials. As Frostspire Castle emerged on the horizon, the snow sparkling in the pale sunlight, neither spoke of the future. Both knew it would bring more challenges, more dangers, more tests of trust and courage. But for the first time, they believed they could face it together. And in the quiet of the returning day, the tall one's mark pulsed softly, a reminder that power, danger, and destiny were never far behind. Yet for now, it was a heartbeat of hope, a sign that they could survive, that they could fight, and that they were not alone. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the castle walls, the figure watched, plotting the next move. Their eyes gleamed with determination, their presence a constant threat. The tall one's journey was far from over, and the bond between her and the Alpha King would soon be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. But for this fleeting moment, snow falling softly on the castle walls, the world felt still. They had faced the darkness together, and in that unity they found strength, courage, and a spark of something far more powerful than fear: hope. Frostspire Castle stood under the blood-red glow of the full moon. The towers cast long shadows over the frozen gardens, and the wind howled through the battlements like a warning. Within the castle, whispers carried fear. The shadowy figure that had haunted the tall one's path had returned, more dangerous than ever. The time for tests and trials in the forest had passed. Now, the storm had come to the very heart of the kingdom. The tall one and King Alaric stood together in the throne room, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows across the walls. Their hands were not touching, yet the bond between them was palpable. She could feel his presence, steady and protective, as though they were two parts of the same storm, chaotic individually, unstoppable together. Outside the throne room, the castle erupted in chaos. Guards clashed with shadowed forces that seemed to move with unnatural speed. The figure from the Wraithwood appeared, now fully revealed, cloaked in black and wielding a power that rivaled the tall one's own. Their face remained hidden, but the eyes glimmered with hunger for power, for the curse, for the crown itself. "You should have stayed away," Alaric said, voice cold as steel. "This is not your fight." The figure laughed, a sound that chilled the blood. "You cannot claim her. The curse is mine to bend, and I will take what is owed to me. Your crown, your power, even your life, Alpha King, is irrelevant." The tall one stepped forward, her pulse glowing softly beneath her skin. "You do not understand," she said. "This curse is not yours. I am its master, and I will not let you harm him or this kingdom." The figure's shadows surged, twisting and reaching toward her. She raised her hands, the mark on her wrist blazing like a beacon. Light collided with darkness, and the throne room shook. Candles flickered, windows rattled, and the very stones beneath their feet trembled. Alaric drew his sword, moving with precision to shield her from the first strike. "Do not fear," he said, voice steady though his heart pounded. "I am here. We face this together." The battle that followed was both physical and magical, a clash of strength, will, and power. Alaric fought with skill, protecting the tall one while she unleashed the full measure of her curse. Light and shadow danced violently, striking walls, shattering objects, yet neither of them faltered. Their coordination was seamless, a perfect balance of human strength and supernatural force. As the fight raged, the tall one realized the truth of her power. It was not a curse meant to harm or control. It was a force to protect, to bind, to save. And in that moment, she understood that she did not have to fear it alone. Alaric's presence anchored her, gave her courage, and allowed her to wield her abilities with clarity and purpose. "You are stronger than I imagined," Alaric said, deflecting a shadowy strike with his sword. "But it is your heart that will win this." She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the chaos around them disappeared. She could see the trust, the loyalty, and the unspoken bond that had grown over weeks of trials and danger. It was more than affection. It was connection, fierce and unwavering. Focusing every ounce of her power, she channeled the curse into a single, brilliant surge. Light exploded outward, meeting the shadows in a clash that shook the entire castle. The figure screamed, retreating as the energy forced them back. Alaric stepped forward, sword raised, driving the enemy toward the exit. With one final surge, the Tall One pushed the darkness away, binding the shadowed figure in chains of light and energy. The figure struggled, but could not break free. The throne room was silent, the storm of magic fading, leaving only the echoes of battle and the soft, warm glow of victory. Alaric lowered his sword and turned to the Tall One, breathing heavily. "It is done," he said, awe and relief in his voice. You controlled it. You saved us all." The Tall One sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. "It is not just me," she said softly. "It is us, together." For the first time, Alaric allowed himself to kneel beside her. "Together," he repeated. His hand brushed hers, and they held each other not as king and subject, but as equals, as partners. The bond that had grown in shadows and danger now stood unbroken in the light. The castle guards slowly emerged, cautiously observing the aftermath. The shadowed figure had been banished, restrained by the Tall One's power, and the threat that had haunted the kingdom had ended for now. The nobles whispered among themselves, awed by what they had witnessed. The Tall One had proven her worth, not through wealth, beauty, or status, but through courage, mastery, and heart. Alaric stood, his eyes scanning the room, finally resting on the Tall One. The crown, the castle, the throne, they mean nothing if we are not ready to defend what matters most. You have shown me what true strength is. She rose as well, meeting his gaze. And you have shown me that trust is worth the risk. That even a storm can be faced with hope, if not alone, then together. Their hands met, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The throne room, scarred and battered by the battle, now felt sacred, a place where courage and loyalty had rewritten destiny. The Tall One realized that her curse, once feared, had become a symbol of empowerment, a source of protection, and a testament to the bond she shared with Alaric. The court slowly gathered, whispering in awe. Alaric turned to them, his voice carrying the authority of the Alpha King but softened by respect and gratitude. "The Tall One," he said, "has chosen to stand with me, not as a subject but as a partner. Her courage, strength, and heart have earned not only my trust but my respect. She is my equal and my bride, not by command but by choice." Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles who had doubted her now bowed in acknowledgement, understanding that true worth was not measured by lineage or wealth, but by character and courage. The Tall One held her head high, her pulse calm now, her mark glowing softly as a reminder of her power, her victory, and her new beginning. Alaric stepped forward, offering his hand. "Will you stand with me in all the storms yet to come?" he asked, his voice deep and earnest. She took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth within it. "I will," she said, "in storms and in sunlight, in shadow and in light, together." The court watched as the Alpha King and the Tall One stood side by side, united not only by choice but by the trials they had faced together. It was a moment of triumph, but also of promise, a declaration that the kingdom, its people, and their hearts had found a new beginning. Night deepened over Frostspire Castle. The wind had calmed, the moon glowed softly, and snow drifted silently across the towers. In the quiet, the Tall One and Alaric walked through the castle corridors, speaking in soft tones, planning for the future, yet aware of the challenges that still awaited. The bond they shared was strong, forged in danger and tempered by trust. As they paused on the balcony, looking over the frozen northern forests, Alaric's arm brushed hers. "We have survived much," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But more will come. There will always be storms." She leaned slightly against him, comforted by his presence. "Then we will face them," she said. "Together, always." The castle was quiet now, but the kingdom would remember this night. the night when courage and love, trust and strength overcame darkness and fear. The Tall One's curse was no longer a burden. It had become a symbol of hope and resilience. Alaric's heart, once guarded and cold, now knew warmth and partnership. Together, they had forged a bond that could not be broken, a story that would be whispered in legends for generations. And far beyond the castle, in the stillness of the northern forests, the shadowed figure stirred once more. Though defeated, the figure had not disappeared entirely. Eyes glimmered in the darkness, a silent promise of challenges yet to come. But within Frostspire Castle, the Alpha King and the Tall One stood strong, ready for whatever storms the world might send. The blood-red moon began to fade, replaced by the soft glow of dawn. Light touched the towers, glimmering off frost and snow. It was a new beginning, a moment of peace forged through courage, unity, and love. The Tall One and Alaric stood together, not as king and subject, but as equals, partners, and allies. Their hearts beat in unison, a rhythm stronger than fear, deeper than shadows, and brighter than any crown or kingdom. The storms of past and present had tested them, yet they emerged stronger, ready to face the future side by side. And in that union, Frostspire Castle and its people found hope renewed, knowing that even in the harshest winters, light, courage, and love could endure.